All right. Now, in our story, we had gotten you. You had been on the Arapaho. You had gone over to North Africa, and then you came back from North Africa. I think that's about where we pretty much finished talking about, because you were with Africa, Gibraltar, Casablanca.
Then after that, then we headed to the Pacific after we brought the Almac, the AK-10 back to.
Yes.
That was quite a celebration after about 15 days at sea and in the same clothing, no change, no shower, no nothing. We were 4 hours on, 4 hours off. It was a battle, but we finally made it back. But and then after we got back and our next job was to head to the Pacific, and we went through the Panama Canal, and that's about my third trip through there.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to California, went to San Diego, and we picked up a dry dock somewhere, I'm not sure just where it was, but anyway, we picked up a dry dock and we towed it to Pearl Harbor.
Okay. Now, was this something you had to tow behind you?
We had to tow it behind us, yeah, and we had escorts with it, and but it was a big cumbersome thing, but we managed it there, and then we took it out to the Pacific, then we had to take it out to the Pacific. And I don't remember just where we ended up with it out there, but I remember one of the first places we hit was Funafuti, of all places, and not too much action there, but we were hauling ammunition barges from between the islands.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of our jobs. We'd have maybe 2 or 3 lighters. We'd have, I don't know how, maybe 800 or 1,000 tons of bombs we would be hauling. And I remember going into Funafuti and with the barges tied around us, hopefully that when we were hauling that we didn't have rough weather. A lot of times they would break loose, and we had a lot of problems. We had a lot of injuries.
Mm-hmm.
Barges being loose, and then we'd have to not have any other ships. We'd have to go back and capture them and put them together, and it was a job. And we had a lot of men hurt with steel cable being hit, breaking arms and breaking their legs. So that was one of the big problems. But yes,
Now you mentioned
a lot of times we'd be at Funafuti, and all the bombardments between the islands were at night,
mm-hmm.
between the Japanese and they'd hit air forts, so they'd
Mm-hmm.
come over and you'd have searchlights going, and they'd be up above the height of the
Now,
the
where in the
aircraft.
Pacific is Funafuti?
Pardon?
Where in the Pacific is Funafuti?
I know Louis Zamperini made it there, and we were there supposedly that night that he flew in. It was Laura Hill Barron that wrote the book.
Right.
And we were out in the harbor, and that night they were bombed. They had 3 or 4 B-24s they'd flown in, and the Japanese were after them, but we were sitting outside in that harbor with all these bomb barges loaded, and fortunately they weren't on the island themselves, but they'd use barges, and they'd take the bombs off and bring them in on the beach and then put them on their bombers.
Right. I'm just trying to place it.
Yeah,
I'll look it up at some point. Is it near the New
I-
Hebrides or somewhere in that area?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, why I'm not sure, because it's not. I don't.
Because we have
Not the Ellis Island.
Yeah, Ellis Islands is actually possible because that's south of the
where
Gilberts.
I think that Ellis might be the one that.
Yeah.
The Gilberts were where Tarawa, I think,
Yeah.
was at the Gilberts.
Yeah.
I think the Funafuti was the Ellis. But we'd be sitting out in the harbor, and then they'd come over at night and bomb the airstrip, put holes in it, and you'd have to repair it. And they'd do some peripheral damage on aircraft that was not in revetments or in revetments, but we'd be doing the same thing at night over on their islands, the Japanese islands.
Right.
But nothing too much there, but I know that you'd see the natives had little huts But you were never allowed to associate with the natives, and you just had to stay clear of their habitats. But
Did you spend much time ashore there, or were you just in and out?
no. We would once in a while, the captain would find someplace where we could get some beer,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times we would share the beer with the pilots, the fighter pilots, and they'd go up and get some flight time, combat time. They'd fly the beer up and cool it down and bring it back. Yeah, this happened. That's what we found out, to get it cooled, share it with the pilots, and they'd take a trip up and cool it down and bring it back.
All right. Now, you mentioned that you had a mutiny on the Arapaho at some point. I mean, when does that happen?
This later on, that was much later, because we'd gone to Eniwetok, Kwajalein in those battles, and Makin Island. We went on Makin. We were with Carlson's raiders at night. We met at night there, and we had our ship, and also 2 submarines that had Carlson's raiders, and we would rendezvous with them at night. And they hit Makin that one night, and almost they found out that it wasn't too heavily protected, and but we left 5 men on that island that night, and the captain executed them, beheaded them, and it was quite sad.
Why was your ship involved in that operation? I mean, what function does a ocean tug have?
Assist and protect them too from vessels, other vessels, surface vessels, and more of a lookout too, because they're involved in getting troops off and landing them, and rubber rafts and so forth.
Okay.
And but in fact, we even got at Makin Island. We got there a day early. We had to stay away from so they couldn't see us. And then we rendezvous at night with the submarines, and
Well, the Makin operation was kind of strange, because you landed these Marine raiders, and they didn't stay.
well, there were several. No, they didn't say. It was hit at night. It was all a night operation. The Carlson Raider Group was a night operation, and they got in and they got back, but there was 5 men left there, and at the end of the war, the commanding officer, the Japanese commanding officer who did the beheading was hung, and also the one that was caught at Wake Island that beheaded a lot of the civilians, and he was caught and hung, and but Tarawa there's a lot of information that should be given about what happened at Tarawa, because it's never been known.
So what was your connection
My
with that
connection
battle?
with that was the medical end of it, because I was a chief pharmacist mate on and for the 4 days that the battle, we had a lot of casualties. We made a lot of mistakes. There were 2 ways to fight that war out there. MacArthur had one. You went over everyone. Chester Nimitz' idea was to bypass and starve them out, like they did at Truck and Yap. We did that. We starved them out. And at the end of the war, there was no opposition on those 2 islands.
Although actually, after Buna in New Guinea, MacArthur kind of learned his lesson, at least until he got to the Philippines, because in a lot of the East Indies, he went around and isolated Japanese garrisons, and it's actually Nimitz who winds up landing people on heavily defended islands, including Tarawa. So
I didn't think that was it. I thought that was MacArthur's.
No, that's the wrong part of the Pacific. That was Central Pacific. That was Nimitz.
And I didn't know, but I.
They did avoid Truk. They did avoid a couple of the really big bases.
But anyway, it's quite an interesting story. There must have been 150 ships there. We must have had 60 destroyers. We must have had 15 cruisers, and we had 8 or 10 carriers and 8 or 10 battleships of some sort. And we were in an ancillary group, a fleet tug, and there's some net tenders and some other ships. And I mentioned one time we overtrained Mr. Turek, our young Jewish executive officer, and he found out that we were due to air bedding, and we were with this majestic fleet, only ship airing bedding. Now that was embarrassing. I mean, it looked like a sailing vessel out there, all the mattresses hanging all over the side of the ships. But he said, this has got to be done. And he came to me and he said, Chief, have you aired your bedding? I said, I'll air bedding when the officers air their bedding. I mean, I'm not trying to, but it was a point of interest, and they didn't air their beddings, but all the ship was, all the wires and the stanchions, and they had bedding all over, and it was embarrassing, and things were, and I happened to look, and you could see the fleet had moved, and it was hauled down. You could see the outlines of the fleet far off in the distance, but our ancillary group was here, and I looked over on a little bit, maybe 1,000, 2,000 yards out. I saw 3 Betty bombers. The silhouette I knew my silhouettes. So I went to the bridge, and Mr. Turek was on the bridge, and I said, Mr. Turek, has anyone reported those Japanese Bettys? And he looked and he said, they're not Bettys. And I said, I'm sorry, sir, but there are Bettys. I don't think so. So I went back and got my lucky dungarees. I'd like to, why don't you go pick those up, and I want you to bring them over. Those are those I went in the Navy with, and I kept them all the way through. I left ships, and but I had lost weight and gained weight, but this is what, but they had legs in at that time. So I went and every time I'd put my lucky dungarees on, the ship would say, the crew members would say, Doc, what's going on? What's going to happen? I said, well, at this point that day, I said, there's 3 Japanese Bettys over there, and they don't recognize them Bettys, but they are. I went up to the 20mm mount, and I didn't know how to use it. And the Bettys started coming around on the stern, and they made a pass and dropped depth charge. They went out, but I didn't know how to work that mount, and I always regret I didn't know how to. We had a 20mm mount, and I didn't know how to use it. But nothing happened. We were safe. And nothing came over and sunk or shut down the Bettys. But at least we knew I was right.
Right.
They were Bettys, and Mr. Turek never apologized to me. But we had a little things going on between ourselves, but he can just sit him down here.
All right.
But
Okay, but then so the battle on Tarawa goes on for several days.
yeah, this was it was an impressive group, and Tarawa was only 800 yards across, and the highest point was 8 feet above sea level, and it was divided up, but there was only like a square mile of battle area, and it was something new. We had and I'm not sure what Marine groups we had. I've forgotten.
Second Marine Division.
Six. I know we took the 5th to Guadalcanal to Zealand.
Yeah, well, that was a regiment.
And and then we had at Tarawa, our commanding officers, commanding generals were there was Chesty Fuller. He was a senior general, Marine general.
He was a regimental commander in the 1st Marine Division.
Well, he was there. He was the head honcho.
Holland Smith was the commander of the 2nd.
Right now, Holland Smith was second in command. Howard Smith, but he's known as Howling Smith.
Yeah, but he was the commander of the 2nd Marine Division. Chesty Puller wasn't there. Chesty Puller was with the 1st Marines. And
well, he was.
He might have. I guess that by that time they were finished. But he was with the 1st Marine Division because he was still with them at Peleliu in 44. But
Peleliu came a little later.
Peleliu was 44. That's September. So that's a little less than a year after Tarawa. Anyway.
Yeah. But he, Chester, as far as I knew, and what I had was Chesty Fuller was in command, and Howling Smith, his real name was Howard, but Howling Smith, and then there was one other general, his name was Smith, and I don't remember his first name, but there were 3 generals. And the big problem was they made a mistake on the tide, and it was out, and when they went in with the landing craft. And our ship, the Arapaho, was located right at the pier head, and this is where the Marines gathered. We were the jump off, right? We were right at Red Beach 2 and Red Beach 3, right at the head. The Red Beach, looking at the island, was on the port side, our left side, and Red Beach 2 was on the right hand side. Right at the end of the piers, and Red Beach 2 went in, and it was a massacre. But before that, before they went in, there was a heck of a bombardment. It was a creeping bombardment from all the way from the right side. They just creeped, they just pounded it. And where we were at, we could see the Japanese running just ahead of the bombardment. And this was an atoll. There was rock. The ground level, the sand level was only about 3 or 4 feet, so there were no slit trenches. And but they pounded that island heavily. And they also, the command post, the Japanese had a command post that was on Red Beach 3, and it was made out of concrete. It was about 3 or 4 feet thick. Even their battleships couldn't penetrate it. But when they got through with this bombardment, there was so much dust and so much haze and this smoke, but they never killed too many Japanese. Only like 115, 20 hit or casualties, and so they held the first wave of going in, and that was probably a mistake. Could have been, I don't know, I'm not a technician, but that's what I heard. But when it did go in, why the Japanese had also reinforced the pier. They put machine gunners in the pier, and we being at the end, and when the battle was going on, I'd lost it, and I kept screaming, take the pier out. And now the Japanese, the island, the percolation thing on that island was not good. I mean, so much rock, and so they didn't have heads. I mean, they had outhouses. And I've got a map in my file. I mean, it shows all the Japanese outhouses on it, and also on that pier coming out you're looking down on the starboard side, nothing but outhouses. And so their sanitary lookout was just about like ours. I mean, they had sanitation, but it was all outhouses, and all those guys going in Red Beach too. They were going through all this debris. So, but this was a sad situation, and we also had the second wave that was going in. That was all around my ship, and they were coming aboard, and they'd seen everything that had happened on the first wave. It's hard, but these kids had seen, and when I started talking to them, they were going to go in. They'd seen what had happened, and you could talk to them, and you were talking to, their minds were back home, I think. This was going to be so difficult. The first group had been wiped out. A lot of them they couldn't get over the reefs, and they were put in the water, and they had to jump in, and their heavy packs, I mean, they went down. And the second group, you talk to them, and their eyes were, they were home. I mean, I would think that they were thinking about their loved ones and this and that.
Did they
awful.
do any better than the first wave?
They're not going to be any better than the first wave. And when that happened, I think there were 3 men on the beach against the seawall. And the battle was, and the Japanese had, I don't know how many ground
Bunkers and.
bunkers, but for machine gun bunkers.
Yeah.
But what they did, they set on this coral, it's about 4 foot down, and they put a wall of concrete on top of it
Mhm.
that they could go on both sides, and the
Right.
Marines would come in, put grenades in, but they'd be on the other side. The grenade would come in one side, they'd jump on the other side, and the explosion, they figured they got them, but they didn't have them because they were on the other side of that concrete. So it took a little while for them to learn what was going on, but there were a lot of casualties. And I remember that night there were 3 men that I could see that were huddled up against this about 3 foot seawall. And all my screaming, no one listened to me. I had to take out the pier, but just out of frustration, just yelling. But as the second group, I did something that I never heard from any Marine, but I never have talked to many of them.
Mhm.
But I had 15 gallons of alcohol that I'd get from the machine engineering department because it didn't have to count for it. They didn't have to count for it. It was grade A USP alcohol,
Mhm.
grain alcohol. And so I made up in my big hopper, I made and I was filling canteens from that with simple syrup and peppermint. And I've got to do something for these kids, and what can I do? I don't know, but I tried to put a smile on their face or do something, but I might have been the wrong thing to do, but
Now you eventually wind up treating some of the casualties.
yeah, I went. But there's so many side stories that I kind of don't want to go.
Sure.
We had third day, General Howling Smith had sent an order out to the group of ships. They'd lost so many medics, pharmacist mates, Navy pharmacist mates were with these Marines, and they asked for volunteers or people to go. And I talked to my captain, C.B. Lee, and I said, I'll do whatever he'd have to be done. And so anyway, I had the motor launch, I think, or I don't know whatever happened, but I went in on Red Beach 3. I didn't have a helmet on, but I had my chief's cap on, and just as soon as I got there on the beach, some Marine came running over and said, "Get that off your head." You think you're an officer and you'll be gone, but anyway, I saw something that on Red Beach 3, and we were only about 50 yards from the command post, and they'd just taken it, and the Marine officer that had taken it, I have his name, but he was a Medal of Honor recipient, and they've never found his body until this summer. Through ground radar, they finally found out where all the Marines were buried. This has been the secret. But I saw something that I can't understand. Where I went in, there were probably 15 dead Japanese that were in sleeping positions. I didn't see any blood, I didn't see anything, and off to the side of them were 3 that were sitting in each other's lap like on a shell hole, and all the debris, the trees are all torn up, and it's just bedlam. The landscape was unbelievable. But these 3 Japanese were in each other's lap on that side hill, and then the bottom one was sitting there and there with a rifle across his knee. I couldn't see any wounds on any of these men.
Well, concussion from shell blasts can do
I
that.
don't know what happened. I don't know what, but they were all like in sleeping positions, and they're like, and nothing grotesque, no grotesque trauma or anything. But anyway, never could figure it out, never got an answer. But anyway, we picked up casualties, and I said, I was going to head for the hospital ships, and they said, no, there's that ship right down there, and I looked down there, there's an LST with a ramp down, and the stern's door of the island, and they're only like 150 yards off the beach. That's where we went. I'd never seen this type of ship. It was a mass ship, a Navy mass ship. And it was nothing but surgeries on this ground floor, and we could take our ship and bring the casualties up on the ramp. And we did that, and I never knew such a ship, and I can't find it written up in our annuals that it existed. But it's like an Army mass ship, but it's a Navy mass ship, and it had Navy officers, medical officers, and one was standing outside, and he's distraught, and he is screaming. I said, I can't do this, I can't do this. I can't do it. I'm a baby doctor, I'm not a surgeon. And I went to him and I put my arm around him, and what I should have done is slapped him. Because he had what I found out, and I knew that he had hysterical convulsions. And he's trying to escape reality, and Dr. Gillen had taught me about this, and I'll go back a little bit, explain hysterical convulsion. We found this out on after the Wakefield, and he gave us a long dissertation on it. He said that you're going to get casualties that go to a gun crew, and one of them will be down, but he has no wounds. And you go up there and you find out that how did he get down? Did he slide down? Did he fall down? Or he has no signs of being hit. But what he'll possibly be will be what we call a hysterical convulsion. The mind is a great organ. He said it can help you escape reality. It can, if you can't stand this situation, it'll put you down. It's like going into the first stage of anesthesia. And sometimes these kids, or they get the extreme part, they'll put themselves too deep, just like an anesthesiologist. You have to worry how deep they take you in your anesthetic. And the last thing that you ever can do is give them a sedation narcotic. You cannot do it because you'll kill them. They'll never come out of it. And that was one of the greatest lessons I ever learned, because I saw it happen. In Guinea, I've got the records here of a magazine. They wrote about trench warfare in Guinea. And they also found a lot of soldiers, or people that had no signs of injury, but they were unconscious. We'd sedate them, but we never got into, none of them ever survived. We don't ever know what happened. I kind of thought about it, and I said, they sedated a hysterical convulsion patient. Whether or not I'm right, but I think I'm right. And they put them too deep, and they never came up. But we never had it. We never recovered any of them. But I would go to a gun crew when we were at one particular I know of, and this was at night. We were leaving Tarawa. We were going to Makin Island. One of our carriers had been torpedoed. On this carrier was the young black man that was given a Navy Cross. I found out later that he was on this island. He was killed on this carrier. He was the one that got all the publicity and for these honorable things that he did for the captain on board this battleship. But we were, at night, we left Tarawa, and we came under attack. This is the first time we've ever been under attack by torpedo planes at night. And at nighttime, the planes can see your wake. I mean, you have a fluorescent wake, it's like a searchlight. And the gun crews, and you have, usually damp at night, all your tracers going out. It's like lightning. You don't know whether lightning starts at the ground or comes from the sky, but tracers going out, they're coming back at you. I mean, this is what you, and it takes its toll on gunners at nighttime in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And I was called to this one gun crew when I got there, and one man was down, and the problem is that he's down, and they didn't see him go down. You got all everything is confusion and this and that. Didn't see him, and I saw. There's obviously no injuries, so hysterical convulsion.
Mm-hmm.
Started slapping him, and now the gun crew said, "Doc, what in the hell are you doing? I mean, this kid's hurt." I said, "I got to do it." Said, "Well, you're punching the hell out of him." I said, "I got to get him out of this to keep him alive. I got to get him too. He's in reality so deep.
Mm-hmm.
Keep hitting him." And he finally comes out of it. Then I can take him and I can give him an Eniwetok and put him to sleep and escape, have him escape, and he'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to get him out of this deep. Get him out, then you can sedate him or calm him down, and he can get some rest, get out of that extreme reality. So there's little things we learn, and but that one group on Guinea, they couldn't. I don't know, but it's just a case. Maybe never. I don't know.
I mean, New Guinea?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they were doing trench warfare there at the start, and they were doing surgery in the pits.
Yeah, and they really didn't know what they were doing at that point in a lot of ways.
A lot of ways, yeah, and we were lucky. We had this one doctor that knew all about hysterical convulsions, and it was a big battle. And when the war started, let me bring this back. When the war started, burns were the big thing, flash burns from all the bombs and this, and on the Wakefield, when we took the bomb hit in the sick bay, we were treating burn cases.
Right.
All we had was tannic acid jelly in tubes. That was probably one of the worst things we had for treatment of burns. So then many things were tried, came out of Bureau medicine. And so then they started using gentian violet with silver nitrate. We'd precipitate the silver nitrate, we'd form a eschar. Purple, people would be all purple and with a big eschar. They'd just be scarred, they'd just have all kinds of scars. It would take forever for that to heal. Tannic acid didn't work. So then they came out with orders for boric acid ointment. Use boric acid ointment. They didn't realize that boric acid in large quantities or large areas is toxic, so we lost patients from boric acid poisoning. So then they came out, we finally had developed, the Navy had come out with sulfa drugs, and so they started sulfathiazole ointments. And sulfa on large areas was toxic, and we lost patients there. So someone started using sewer water, and that's what they use even today. Wet dressings, and that's the best for eschars and for healing. They're still using the wet dressings. But we finally learned that at the end of the war.
Okay. Now to go back to your war, you had left Tarawa, you were going off to
the Makin.
Meet the carrier that
the Makin let me go back to Tarawa before, because after the fourth day, all the ships left. We had one destroyer had been beached, and we got it off, and we put divers on board, and they were fine, and so they left, and so now all of a sudden we're the sole ship for Tarawa. No other ship ever entered that harbor, and that pier was never used. But we had to contend with all these bodies. We must have had 5,000 between Marines and Japanese bodies on that island in that hot sun. It's heck. But it happened. And the beaches were so filled with bodies. And the thing was that they didn't want to bring out pictures. But Roosevelt finally decided that before we went into Europe, we're going to have all kinds of casualties. So they started preparing, and they finally showed the pictures of what happened at Tarawa. And but after the fourth day, all the ships left, and we had Seabees on the island, and we had some Marines on the island, and we were still fighting. We had these little atolls at the island, and we were assisting these group of Marines going in and taking Japanese off these islands, these little atolls. They're only like 100-foot things.
Yeah, these little individual keys as part of this larger coral atoll.
But we did. That was going on, but we had all these bodies, and we were picking them up. They were coming out of the water, but on the island there must have been. But I think it was on the 5th day. None of them had been buried. And it was untenable, the stench. And we couldn't see the sun, all the green botflies came up. And it was
did they take mass breaks?
Then all of a sudden, you couldn't see the island, the flies. But then I heard the bulldozers come out. It had to be done. And after the war, where there were many crosses, no bodies under them. They were wondering what happened. The story never been told, and they called me 8 or 10 years ago, and they said I might have some information. And I told them, they asked me the question. I said, let me ask you a question. Where are the Japanese buried? Don't know. I said, answer me that question. Where are the Japanese buried? And so evidently we couldn't. I mean, I wanted them to admit that they bulldozed it, or they did something with them, but out of necessity, they had to bulldoze these. And now in this last year, there's been reports, and I've got, my one son sent me reports and what he'd seen in the papers, and they're using ground radar out there, and now they're finding the bodies, there are groups of bodies, and they think they found the one that was at the command post and got the Medal of Honor, and there were 5 Medal of Honors, 4 or 5 at Tarawa. Some people Tarawa this, but if you're there, it's called the growl Tarawa. I mean, it's a growl. But I don't. But it happened, and.
Now after that, because you went with the Arapaho when you were involved in several more landings after that, right? Or at least
after that, I'm trying to think of. We didn't go to Peleliu.
No, Peleliu. There's Kwajalein and Eniwetok and the Marianas.
Yeah, we went to we were in Guam and Saipan and I think that
Tinian is the other island in the Marianas we landed on.
We weren't there, but we were always working on these ships get damaged. We'd go to them, and firefighters. And also one thing we happened on board ship. I noticed that all our seamen were no longer on our ship, and I went to the yeoman, Chief Yeoman, and I said, well, I've seen so many new seamen, and pulled out the records. It's hereby the finding of the General Court Martial that you be sentenced to your choice of prison, Portsmouth prison, for hazardous duty. And that's what all our crew members were. They were general court-martials that were sent to hazardous duty. It was hazardous duty because ships get damaged and we'd fighting the fires and fighting all this and explosions but they were fantastic sailors, and they never complained. And I talked to several of them after the war, and they said it was the finest thing. And several that had seen me with bodies on board, they said, I would never have your job and what you had to do. So it was the exchange of.
So were crews kind of rotating on and off? They would sort of serve their time or something, and then
No, it's usually when a person had enough time, or for some reasons they'd take him off. And but most of our officers stayed, but not until about 44 did we start losing any of the officers. Now we had one of the big stories that, well, there's a lot of stories, but Kwajalein, that was we called it the execution island. That's where the Japanese Zamperini was taken to Kwajalein. And I've got it over there, and there's a little belt sitting on top of this little belt, the little grass belt. This came from Kwajalein. There's a story to it. I went on in the landing. I don't know, I was kind of a nutcase. I did. And during the landing, I found a couple, an English couple, about 35 or so, ragtagged, and they were prisoners of the Japanese. And they had survived the bombardment. They'd been, I don't know how long they'd been on the island, 5 or 6 months. Every night the Japanese would put them on a post. They'd tie them up to the post on the airstrip. And they had to survive the night. They'd take down and get food, and every night that's what they had to do, would be put on the airstrip. That's where all the bombing was at night. And then they experienced, I don't know what nationality they were, but they spoke English, and they were about 35. They must have been educators somewhere, but I don't know. But I found them cowering, and they'd survived the bombardment, which was hellish. And I took them back to my ship. I mean, I got them on board, and they were just kind of, I don't know, there's so much going on, and I just took them back to the ship. And got them some clothing and put them, you had them use the chief's shower so they could get a warm shower and get cleaned up and this and that, and fed them and got them used clothing, and found sweatshirts or dungarees or something, and something they could wear, and something clean and new. And before they left the ship, the only thing they had me this. And I said, I can't take, they didn't know what it was, but it's made out of grass. This is the grass. And take a look how that's done. That's the only thing they had, and they said, we want you to have this. Oh, they intricate this out of
pattern
grass.
there on it.
Isn't that something? Look at the color. Made out of grass, and they gave me that. And I want to, if you have any need for it, or in a museum, do you have anything?
We can't really take artifacts.
Oh, you can't?
I mean, that's
I'm trying to find some place that would take that, because my family don't know one thing or another, and just go in the junk heap. But that's I should put the story on that.
Yeah, that's
But these things I'm always gonna do tomorrow and they don't do them. Typical
Right.
procrastination, but that's a story. That's what that couple, that's the only thing they had.
Yeah.
And I took them to the hospital ship, and I don't even have their names. And but the island, Zapparini was there, I know, but they had these little shacks where they were in, but some of them were banged up. But it was called the Execution Island. I know when Zapparini was pinked up when he lost his plane, or there was on the water, and the rafts for about 50 days or so away. They were picked up by this Japanese destroyer, and they recognized who he was, an Olympic star. And they told him that they got orders to take him to Kwajalein, and they wouldn't be as friendly as what we are, but hopefully you get by. And basically that's what I remember, that couple, and what happened, and there was a lot of casualties, and not so many, but
Kwajalein, Eniwetok, Ulithi were not as bad as Tarawa was.
Oh no, that was considered, for square footage, that was the most bloodiest battle in World War II. And
as you're going back and forth now to these different islands, are you going into ports anywhere in between?
In the ports? No. Once we went to Pearl Harbor, we towed a carrier, and another time we escorted a carrier, I think it was the Makin. I forgot now what, but I know we ran into bad weather, and it was so surprising that the captain on the carrier said we were only escort ship. We had depth charges and everything, and sound gear, and we could do almost anything, but we didn't have much in the way of a deck gun, 3-inch gun. But he said you could steam in their wake if you like, and so we were off in the rough water, so we got in their wake, and it was quiet, and so that rough sea, that was nice. So he put himself in jeopardy because we weren't doing too much sound gear out there and for submarines, but we steamed in his wake. I remember that. But yeah, but usually when we get to Pearl Harbor and something like that, then they have us chasing torpedoes. We would always work night and day. We'd be in one of these harbors, and we'd be working night and day, and there wasn't that much rest and all the dirty work. And
what sort of work would you do in the harbors?
Well, they'd find work for us, and we were hauling and towing night and day, and moving vessels to here and there, but the one we finally got to the secret base, Ulithi. Are you familiar with the Ulithi, and what was this? This was all about. We got to Ulithi. This was a fantastic base. We got to put the entire American fleet in that base, and this was going to be the jump-off place for Japan. But the Japanese could still hit us. I mean, they still would hit us occasionally, not often, but occasionally. But their big problem with us was using their submarines, and they bring the Kaitans in, K-A-I-T-E-N-S, the man torpedo. And the fellow, I found his body after he sunk the Mississippi Wave, Lieutenant Sikio Nishina. And I've got a lot of material here from Japan and identifying his body and so forth. But that one day we were attacked, I think, by 5 of them, but we didn't know what they were, had no idea they existed. And the Mississippi Wheel was sunk. And we were there with them, and I had a few dead on my ship. And we had to stay there and float them after it went down. And I would have to make out 4 men's death reports on all the people I found and fingerprint them and do it all and sign the report. But we finally found one last body that his head was sheared off, and that was a Japanese and straight black hair, and he was not Caucasian and had no idea who he was and didn't know. We thought a miniature sub had sunk the Mississauga. Had no idea that it was a Kaitan torpedo. But we this was a lot of things that went on. We just didn't understand. There was so many perplexing things, and this went on for years, and it wasn't until about 8 or 10 years ago I was watching a program, and it was a Japanese program, and it said they were explaining kaitans, and I didn't even know what they were, so I watched the program. They said one of the kaitans in November the 24th at Ulithi sunk the oil tanker, the Mississauga. And I jumped up and I said, now by God I know what happened.
Wow.
And then the body I found, and this is what they were interested in, that they thought this man had sunk it, but I'd found his body. But he was buried as not knowing who he was. He had best of both worlds. He was buried as, I believe that he was, because they had no way to think he was Japanese. I think he received a American hero's burial, and he also, in Japan, he was honored too. So then this past year, on the 75th birthday anniversary of the war, by Japanese celebrated in Japan the war and celebrated their heroes, and some of the reports I gave them, they were included in so it's quite an honor. But something else happened. It's we were called to go out and meet. This is at the end of September, early November. We had a big typhoon out there, and this task force was.
Was this 43 or 44 now we're talking
44,
about?
44. The cruiser, the Reno, had been torpedoed, and that was a sister ship to the Juno. The Juno they're both anti-aircraft cruisers,
right.
3 forward, 3 aft, and the Juno was one that the 5 Sullivan brothers were on. They were lost at the Second Battle of Savo Island, the 5 Sullivan brothers on the Juno. The Reno was a sister ship. And we left Ulithi on our own, and we went and joined this task force that was coming back. And the water was rough, and there was swells at 20 feet high, and we finally met to them after a couple of days, and the Reno was being told, I think, by the Zuni, but it needed help so bad, so we were trying to get lines monkey fists over, and we had to put water and they needed oil too, but they had no motivation, but they needed oil. They needed also water. So we were trying to get supplies over to them, and all this was going on, and the chaos. I mean, all the swells and this and that. I was suddenly called up to the bridge, and the bridge was packed with people. Everyone was seemingly, all the officers were up there, everyone was up there, and Mr. Turek, he saw me when I got up there. He said, Chief, he said, what do you think of the captain? What do you mean? What do you mean? Watch the captain. He was at the wheel. was gonna say he's drunk as a skunk, but I think that's the word I'd use to him. I think he's drunk as a skunk. And so Turek said, what do you recommend? And I said, to myself, I didn't realize about Article 184. I had no idea of it at that time, but I finally learned out real soon about it. Drinking was an alcohol, it was a medical thing. And no way can another officer take a captain off for being drunk. It has to be someone from the medical department.
Mhm.
So I was the one that had ordered him off the bridge. No, I said, then a mutiny? What the hell have I done? I've ordered the captain off the bridge. And so he was very reluctant. He was combative and took him off the bridge. He wasn't a happy camper, and we put him in his cabin. Nothing was said between Turek and myself, the executive officer.
Mhm.
He remained there for 3 or 4 days, and I never saw him on board the ship. And finally we got into Ulithi with the Reno. Ship was hauled down to the water. I mean, it was practically up to the main deck, water. And we finally got it over to the dry dock, and we got it secured. And we got that secured. Pretty soon, the executive officer came to me and he said, we got another job to do. He never explained anything, never explained it. So I followed him and we went up to the captain's cabin. And they had quite a discussion. The captain was in his bed and he got up, and it's the first time I ever saw him, heard him call him Mr. Turek. He always referred to him anywhere, where's Jew boy? Or you can take some of this out, but this happened. He said, where's Jew boy? Where's Christ killer? I mean, that's what I referred to him as, but Turek, how he ever put up with it, I'll never know. But he did, and but he got up, and Turek pointed his finger at him and said, if you ever jeopardize this ship or the crew, he said, I'm going to turn you into the Commodore, the Admiral. And I kept thinking, I've just taken him off. I was thinking mutiny. And I never knew about the Article 184s, but anyway, I never said a word except on the bridge, and that we left, it was left there. Now, after that happened, the captain, all of a sudden he must have showered, and it was about 2 hours later, I saw him get in his motor launch, and he was all decked up with a tie and his new khakis and hat and shaven and spiff, and he was gone. And it was about later in the afternoon, I heard the signal going on, signaling up there, and the light, and he came down. He said, he's yelling, Mr. Turek, Mr. Turek, here I am, son. What's up? He said, you've just got your orders. What the captain had done, had gone on the beach and told the admiral or somebody, you got to get rid of this. So he got orders for him, and once those orders came aboard, he could not make a complaint against the captain. Once the orders came aboard. And now the orders were open-ended. Didn't tell him when, but he said it's up to the discretion of the captain. So he was like, the captain had a turnabout and had him to where, and he gave him some dirty jobs, and he was on some awful watches, but he put up with it. And when all of this was going on, I had my orders come back to the States, but I had to wait for my relief. For the last month and a half, I'd had my orders, but they never could find me. My replacement, I couldn't leave until my other pharmacist mate came aboard. And this was on, I think it was November about the 24th, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm. And
That
did
could
you
be
have
wrong.
any trouble with the captain yourself, or did he just direct his hostility toward us?
I didn't know what he was going to react, because I was the one that took him off, and I escorted him down with the exec.
Mm-hmm.
But no, he didn't. But no, the thing is that the Cane Mutiny. Now, let's go back to the Cane Mutiny. Captain Queeg, Herman Woke, and Alexander Turek both went to Columbia. And when I was in New York City, someone yelled at me, "Hey, Chief Doak," and by God, it was Turek.
Mm-hmm.
He came over and we had a big bear hug, and he said, "I got to talk to you." He said, "There's a book we got a book coming out, something's coming out, and I want to talk to you." And I said, "Well, I'm over at Hunter College," and I gave my telephone number, but he never called me.
Mm-hmm.
But I have the answer to that why he didn't call me, and I had the chief yeoman had called me. He said Turek had been calling other people about a book about what the captain had done and all
Mhm.
this and that. So at one point, several months before, the captain had found two men in the jack of the dust locker next to the galley. That's where they bring up the food from the storeroom and put it it's expended. They put it in the jack of dust locker. And it's held there until the cooks need it, and then they go over and they take it out of the locker and use it. Well, at night, the captain had found these two fellows. He'd been after them for some time, and he court-martialed, gave them a summary court-martial for stealing peaches. They had a big gallon, big cans of peaches, opened up, and they were eating these peach halves out of that big can, and he charged them for stealing peaches, food.
Okay.
It
Now
was sent.
this tape is
Go ahead.
finishing, so we've got to pause there. Okay, we're back on. We were in your story. You had talked about the captain had found these two fellows who had stolen peaches
Yeah.
in the locker.
Okay. This was, yeah, he caught them, he gave them a summary court-martial, and and they finally was sent to the Judge Advocate General's office. And it came back, they were not guilty. And I never heard a captain scream so loud in all my life. Everyone on the ship heard him when he got this report. It said that these peaches had been expended. They'd been in the jack of the duck's locker.
Mm-hmm.
And you should have counted the peaches and see if they'd eaten too many. You should have counted how many were in. They were, part of that ration belonged to them. What you should have charged them for was breaking and entering. But everything. I mean, everything was so mad. He was a screwball like Captain Queeg on that.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where the parallel. And this, we're going to explain this, what happened. But so much of this would happen to him, and he was just blow his stack. But he was actually, he found out that I had deep sea divers over, and we would have divers over, and I would tend them, but the Navy had a custom. We had brandy on board the ship, but it was only for one person. That was the diver.
Mm-hmm.
When he came out of that water and what he'd gone through, he needed, the brandy was a medicinal for
Mm-hmm.
some reason, for some reason, but he found out I had brandy. He said since he was the captain, he could order, he could use the brandy and have brandy. And he put pressure on me. I said, Captain, this is medicinal brandy, it has to be used for, he said, I'm the captain of the ship. Why not? And so he forced me. He he said, we'll set it up. I said, you've got to be expended. He said, put a bottle of brandy on the #1 life raft, and you can come up. And so the way he did it, said I'd go up and he'd be at on the bridge of the ship, and the messenger would have come down. He said he needed some beverage, and so I'd go up to the bridge and say, Captain, there's a bottle of brandy missing off the #1 life raft. That SOB, he said, we're going to catch him. Navigator, put a notation in the log that the bottle of brandy missing from the #1 life raft. So I go down, I'd expend it off my ledger, do it his explanation. So that's how that was being worked. So he was stealing brandy, but I was in collusion. I mean, I had to do what he said anyway, so I did it. But so many things like that was going on. It's like the strawberries on the cane mutiny, but you might want to read. The parallels were so true. See, on the cane, you had Captain Quigg. On the Arapaho, we had Captain Gunn, and on the executive officer on the cane was Myrick, and on the Arapaho was Turek. Both single syllables for the captains, and now that's my son again, the one that got all D's and E's. Now we talked to him, but there's no way that he's going to agree,
Right.
Because it's illegal. You can't use life stories and admit then that they were real people. And I talked to attorneys, and I said, well, there's no way he could confess that this story came from, but I know where it came from.
Right.
Both were both from Columbia. They were good friends, and Turek's book. But all he said, we're involved in a book. It was a cane mutiny.
Yeah. Of course, on some level, you have plenty of things that are done all the time where they're based on true stories.
Yeah.
And so, but I guess if something has never been in the news and you publicize it without someone else's permission, that could get interesting.
Well, that's where the story that came off. The story came from, and from the Arapaho, and all the idiosyncrasies and the problem with him, and the petty court martials and all the crap, and it was just. And then have to take him off the bridge. I mean, there was a lot of stories. But when the executive officer saw me in New York City, and we had that meeting, he was so happy. He said, "I got to tell you," because we were both part of it, but he never went into detail. But he said, "I want to talk to you, and I want to get together with you," but legally he couldn't, because then someone would know that it's from a real story, real people involved, and Myrick and Tyrek, and Turek and Quigg and Gunn, and it's interesting.
Right.
But
It's not to go back. Are there other things that kind of stand out in your memory about your time aboard the Arapaho? I mean, we've gotten a number of the different landings. You haven't really talked much about what happened in the Marianas.
No, we had a officer steward by the name of Jesus Cruz. His name was spelled Jesus, J-E-S, but it was Jesus, which is proper, I guess. But I helped him get over it. And when it was all quieted down to speak of, why then he got permission to go up where we landed. It wasn't too far from where his village was, and I helped him go, and never should have gone, because there was rape in the family and hardships, and he never recovered. I mean, he was such a happy-go-lucky young man, a nice young man, and he never recovered.
And was that on Guam?
That was in Guam. That was on Guam. And but we had one man who stayed there his name was Head, I believe, and he was there for almost 4 years, and he survived There's a Japanese that survived on one of the Bougainville or someplace for 25 or
Well,
30
there were
years.
Japanese on Guam for a long time too.
Yeah, there was, yeah.
Right.
But,
Now,
so much.
were you off Saipan at the end of that battle, or were you gone by then?
We were gone, and there's so much I don't talk about what I did. But I ran into Dr. Gillen that was on the Wakefield that knew all about it. It was so good, but he was the one that I came to back in the after dressing station. And I euthanized my best friend, but he said, I saw him out in the Pacific I found he was on the Cascade, senior medical officer, aircraft tender, seaplane tender. And I went over to him, and we spent the afternoon together on his ship and talking and going over a lot of things. And the senior medical officer on the Wakefield, his name was Robert Kenneth Young Dusenberry, R.K.Y. Dusenberry. He outranked the captain, the Coast Guard captain. But he would volunteer for anything. He was a wonderful physician, but he was also a urologist. And he was also in charge of ship service. He'd have people down there paying his bill and be line paying bills for the ship service. He'd also have another line. You made sure he got in the right line because are you going to get a prostatic massage? Because you never know what. He was always involved, and he was volunteer for. He was a workaholic, wonderful guy, but he hard to work for because he always been paid. You got to get it done. Got to get it done. But Gillen was just the opposite. He was from Brooklyn, and but on the Cascade we spent the afternoon. And we got to talk, and when I went aboard the Arapaho, with surgery and everything, and what I could do, and I wrote to the Bureau of Medicine, I wrote to the Navy Department, I sent letters to both, and I said, I want instructions. What's the extent of my liability, or my extent of ability? What can I do on board ship? What's my extent of my life of what I can do? I never got an answer. I went to when I was with Dr. Gillen. He said, Marshall, he said, you can do anything that you think you can do. There's no liability, nothing. And that's what I was up against, and there's a lot of things that I did.
So
with the training and working on education, working in surgery, because doing appendectomy, that would be simple. And, but you get down and trying to decipher which nerve is which, that'd be something else. But there are things that you could do, and did so much suturing and other types of puncture wounds, things like that. But there was no limit to what I was entitled to do. So this, as a medic, a lot of people don't realize that, and you tell them, I mean, you don't really tell them because they don't believe you anyway, so you have the ability. But if you're working, it's just like in dental work, I mean, it wasn't more than 3 or 4 months I was doing all the mechanics. I mean, I had no problems once I learned how to work with the mirrors.
Right.
So, and someone could be a doctor too, really pass, and with some, just as long as you work on the job training, you're right there, you see it done.
Yeah. So were you at these other, I know you were treating ground combat casualties at Tarawa, and then did you do that again at these other places?
Oh yeah, yeah, I do. But see, there's not a day, I mean, I've said the war itself was hard, but the most difficult part is the post-war. I mean, I can't account for the things that happened. I mean, I apologize in my family, and I'm on good rapport with all my family. But I've got 3 wonderful sons, but 2 of them don't have children. They won't have. But there's only one. That's my son, the judge across the street. and, but they take good care of me, and, but I can't explain to them what happened.
No.
And
And they,
it's, but during the day go by, I mean, I wake up at night, I'm taking notes, I mean, I see things, I dream, and I got so many, I mean, I haven't even covered half of what I could
all
cover.
right. At this point, when did you leave the Arapaho and why did you leave it?
I got orders, okay, now that's part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
I left, my relief came aboard.
Right, right.
All this was happening, this was,
Mm-hmm.
the mutiny, all this was this was one hell of a month.
Mm-hmm.
The Mississippi went down, and Seco and Sheena, the torpedoes, riding the torpedoes, and all this and other things in the island, and the mutiny, and my relief coming aboard, and there are other things I'm trying to think that happened, but so many. But then when my relief came aboard, why, the captain who had called me up and thanked me for, but the thing was that he didn't, when he got rid of me, then he could get rid of Turek, and then he could let him go off the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was the key, because I was the one that had taken him off the bridge. And Turek was not a threat because he couldn't make a complaint against it. I was the one that could make the complaint,
Mm-hmm.
being drunk. So when I left, why then, I went aboard the Enterprise for transportation. I got to be in my first air conditioning, and I never had experienced before on board the aircraft. The sick bay was air conditioned, and being a chief, I didn't have any duties, and I would sleep in the sick bay. But I'd be on top side watching the planes, and I happened to be sitting up there one day and talking. I said, God, I'd like to take off on the plane. You would. And I could see the look in the guy's eye, and he came back and he said, we got a group going over, a training group over Yap. It's been bypassed. There's nothing on the island. So we just got a couple of training. We don't need a gunner on there, and you can go on the TBF. And I said, oh God, great. And I started thinking, I'm on my way home. And I've always had the fear of aircraft, and I didn't. And I finally, I hemmed and hawed. I went around and I said, oh God, this would be something I could take off and land and off the Enterprise and go to Yapper truck and take a look. And I finally said, I've got to turn it down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came back to the States and came out. And after my first week at home here in St. Joe, my brother got a hold of me and said, Marshall, you want to go out to the airport? I've got a friend that's got his license, we're going to go take a flight. Yeah, I'll go. And so I went out to the airport, and I said, it's an Aeronica, a little yellow Aeronica, and I later on flew in the darn thing. But anyway, first flight ever, sat next to the pilot and took off, and where we lived was not too far from Lake Michigan over on and we took off, and I noticed the guy was busy, but we took a big turn and went out over Lake Michigan. I was looking for big sturgeon, and kept going, and the pilot was still busy, and we came around and we landed, and he collapsed. Don't tell anyone. He was trimming the plane. All the blocks were in he had no controls.
Oh.
All the blocks were in the ailerons and the rudders, and he was controlled by the trim tab. And he landed, he got down. He just sat there and said, don't tell anyone. And he went out and he pulled off all these blocks and all the aileron. That was my first flight after I turned down the one on the Enterprise. So I said, oh God. But then I did take up flying and I got my license, but I came down one day in the wintertime and scraped the wing. I said, that's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
So in the meantime here, so you go back home, you have your flying experience. Now, what's your next assignment?
it was, I came back and I ordered for Naval Hospital in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
the big hospital.
Right.
Well, it was actually in Brooklyn, but it was the New York Naval Hospital,
Right.
Brooklyn, New York. And my boss was the politician, John A. McCormick. And I think he had something to do with me. I think because he wasn't surprised to see me, and he said, "Oh, well, he was in property accounting and administration, and I fell right into it. It was God's duty. Mess hall. I mean, mess with the officers and napkin holders and order from the menu, and it was own quarters and couldn't have better duty.
Had you known him at Great Lakes when you were there
Yeah,
earlier?
Great Lakes. I
Okay.
was his private. I did all these private runnings,
Mhm.
and so I knew his daughter, knew her quite well, and so we got along real well, and so. But his power structure. Now, I want to tell a story when I was at Great Lakes at the Naval Dispensary. We had a lot of reserve officers. This was in 1940. We had a lot of commanders, and one was from Michigan. I won't say his name, but he was a full commander, but he wore heel plates, and he coming on a hard surface way. You knew he was coming, and he was quite dapper. And we were assigned in 1940 to go to the University of Michigan. They had V12 or V7 programs, and give physicals. And I was doing the lab work. I was a third-class petty officer, and he was the commanding officer of this group. There were 3 or 4 doctors, and they were going to give physical exams, and I was doing the lab work, simple lab work, albumin, sugar, and specific gravity.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got all through with the examinations, I had maybe 3 or 4 had doubtful urines. And when he came in that one time, I said, well, here are the ones that I have. And he said, oh, just a minute. And I said, he started going through the records. He had maybe 150, and he picked out some. And he had a pile of maybe 6 or 7. Set them aside, and I said, well, Commander, I said, these are the ones that I found. He said, well, clinically, we also can tell whether, albumin is sugar. I questioned. But in mine, I said, something I didn't know about. And so he walked out of the office where I was at, or in the lab, and I looked at, there's something odd about this seven or so.
Mm-hmm.
They're all Jewish. And the ones these are the ones I really had checked, and no way clinically, is he going to pull that on? And so I said, okay, what's up? Is he anti-Semitic, or what the hell is he? I don't know what he is, and so then the next trip we went back, and then we went to Northwestern University, and we did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
He did the same thing, pulled the same crap. So I told John McCormick, I don't know how I have no record, but also he noticed that I wasn't really accepting what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you're a young, smart man, and said, I'm at the University of Michigan, and I'm on the staff or the board, or said, I have a lot of ability, and I said, I can get anyone in, and I'd like to sponsor someone over there, and that when this thing is over, I said, would you like to become a doctor? And I said, oh yes, I'm very much interested. And so that was, I knew what was going on. So he knew what, anyway, but in about that time or a little after, I got my orders to go to the Wakefield. Now, when the war was over, we had the state medical meeting, and I'd gone into, after I left the University of Michigan, I went into the surgical supply and the hospital supply business, and meaning I called on physicians, and everything went in the hospital I sold and I serviced. I serviced all this equipment, X-ray, linear accelerator, whatever it was, I'd serviced. And that I heard the heel plates coming one time, and I just looked down, and there was this doctor coming down the hallway, all by himself, and there were other doctors around, and I stepped out, and I said, I called him by name, doctor. He said, oh, you know my name? I said, oh yeah, I've known you very well. I was with you up at the University of Michigan, Northwestern, and when you were examining V12, I said, I don't remember you. I said, do you remember John McCormick? He said, well, that son of a bitch. He said, that guy, he should have been in jail, and he said, so I knew. That was my key. I said, I mentioned John McCormick's name, and boy, he could, oh, he should be in prison. And so I knew that he'd been called down, and by the higher, John had gotten hold of someone, and they'd gotten him.
All right. Now, what rank did John have?
He was a chief pharmacist, which is a chief warrant, when I knew him at Great Lakes. It'd be part of the medical department.
Right.
He's administrative and knows all, but
he's a warrant officer.
He's a warrant officer. But when he was at New York Naval Hospital, he was a full commander then, and he was my mentor. I mean, but his power was just. But he got. And I thought he was kidding me when I said, I'm going to have you transferred. Okay, now we went to Hunter College. I got to tell you about my duty at Hunter College.
Now, you had told me, I think, off camera a little bit about that business with him telling you he was going to give you better duties. So could you kind of tell that story a little bit more fully now?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you. It's interesting. Took the subway at Hunter College. This is where the United Nations started. Hunter College was after the war.
Well, I actually was asking you to back up a little bit, because you're just mentioning in passing you're being switched from the Naval Hospital to Hunter College. But all we've got on tape right now is you're saying that the Naval Hospital job was a really good one. You got to eat with the officers and so forth.
Okay, yeah.
And McCormick was your commander. But now pick up the story with that. How does...
Well, then he said, I'm going to have you transferred. You need something better than this, Marshal. And I said, I'm very happy. This is great. I said, I can't beat this for duty. This is fantastic. Yeah, but you deserve better. And I said, what can be better than this? And he said, I don't know, but I think I can figure out something. You're deserving more than this. And I thought he was kidding. But 3 or 4 weeks later, the messenger came in and said, Chief Doak, you have your orders. I said, where am I? Oh, you're kidding. He said, no, I'm not kidding. You got your orders. I don't know who you know. I said, where am I going? He said, you're going to Hunter College. I don't even know what it is or where it is. And he said, you don't. That's in the Bronx. That's a few miles up the way, and that's the Waves training station. 10,000 women and about 15 men. I said, oh. So I had to pack my luggage and take a cab, and when I walked in to see John McCormick, he had a big smile on my face, on his face, and he said, now you see what I mean? I said, I haven't seen it yet, but I don't know, I haven't been there yet. So the commanding officer, great, her name is Helen Jacobs, and you're going to get along with her fine. And so I got there, and Helen Jacobs was the Wimbledon tennis champ. She was quite a tennis player, and so we got to know each other, and I was in charge of all the property and counting. When I got in, The fellow that was leaving, the chief that was leaving, he said, well, you just want to sign the transfer of all the inventory and equipment. I said, well, I'm not used to doing that, I just soon take an inventory. He said, well, everyone just signs it. And I said, no, I don't do those. I mean, I'd rather take an inventory and see what's there. So it was one of the best things I ever did in my life, because I wouldn't sign it, but he left, and so I finally decided I'll do a formal survey, and this is the top of the line, and through the survey I found out we were missing X-ray equipment, dental equipment, chairs, everything, podiatry equipment. I mean, it was just everything was, and all the doctors that were on this base were reserves, and they had private practice on the side. So I created a real situation when I started this, and I don't know what I found out, $1 million, or I mean, just it was a lot of money that was missing, and on a formal survey you have discipline indicated or something like that, and everything was yes. I had to put it in there because it was missing. It was gone off the base. And so I created a ruckus, so I called the medical supply depot in Brooklyn, and they said, well, just make an inventory. I said, you come on out. Send someone out here. I want not just my signature. I want you to see the formal survey, and I want it approved and see what I've got. So they came out, and they also put the endorsements in there. So I got myself protected, but I'd done the right thing. So then they started saying, well, he said, the war is at the end. Said, we need guys like you. And they said, we'll give you a commission, or we give you a chief warrant, whatever you think you want. And I said, no, I'm going home. So if this happened here, it's going to be a real mess elsewhere at all the other bases. When of course, out in the Pacific, they were just dumping things in the harbors and the bays, and I didn't want to be part of that. And what was it? Oh yeah, this was quite an experience, because I've learned that with the men, you could say, hey, damn it all, we got to do this. You couldn't talk that way to girls. I mean, I had about 150 of them under my, and what did they do wrong? I mean, I didn't think I was harsh, or I mean, I thought I was, put my point across, but also I wore a good uniform, and like there was one Master of Arms chief, a dresser there from California. She's a police officer. She's about 45 or so, and she saw me and she said, "You're going to have a lot of problems here." I said, "You're a sharp-looking guy, young guy, and you're going to have to be taught what not to do." And she was right. So we were good friends, and one night one evening I got a call from some lady or girl I had known somewhere, and she'd been in the wax and she was no longer in there. And I told the dresser, I said, I got a call that someone wants to have dinner with me tonight, and she was in the wax. So she's in the wax, huh? And she said that, where are you going to go to dinner? And I told her the restaurant, and I was going to meet this party there, and so I was in the process of having dinner with this beautiful young lady, and the maitre d' came up to me with a telephone and said, "You got a telephone call?" I said, "I have, no one." I said, "Who knows I'm here?" So I picked up the phone, this dresser. Said, "Chief," he said, "you're a vulnerable person." And he said, "All I'm telling you is your friend is pregnant."
Oh.
And they said, "There's a lot of things you don't know anything about, but this is, be careful that you don't recognize things that another lady might recognize." But So she had made her way in, she wanted to make sure, and she said, you need to be looked out after, because you're, but that was over and above the call of duty, but she did that. But she could sit and see people marching or walking by her. She could almost tell what state they were from, how they walked, and especially how they talked, but a wonderful individual, but Helen Jacobs was the officer in charge, and she was the Wimbledon champ, and was a wonderful person, and had the privilege of her showing me at my first pizza pie at one of the restaurants, or one of the Italian restaurants. Went in there and we had a pitcher of beer and pizza. I never the pizza. Boy, that's good. I said that all go over good at home. And little did I know that, and I guess they call it Italian pies out there or something like that. But it was something new I'd never had. But the girls would play tricks on me. I mean, I was in charge of property accounting, and I'd have my desk right there, and across the way would be the sick bay, manned by girl pharmacist mates, and also they would have what they called a daisy chain. They'd have a group of 200 more girls coming in, and they'd be playing all kinds of tricks on me, and they say, Chief, we need material up at the doctors want you to bring it up. And I said, no, I can send it up. And they said, no, the doctors want you to send it up. So you go up in the daisy chains, and they just want to embarrass me, but they'd have maybe those 200 girls up there, going through the daisy chain, and partially unclothed or some damn thing, and they were trying to get to me. But then there were, I think, 70 chiefs at Hunter College, female chiefs. I was the only male chief. And I had to walk through this big dining hall at Hunter College, all the recruits. And every time I'd step in, they'd clap every step. And I had to walk up onto the big podium up here, or the chief's dining room, and sit down. And so it was a long walk. So it was a different, and then you'd have someone you want to get after, something I'm doing right, and I'd get after them, and they start tears come down their eyes. And I said, damn, I can't, you got to change your attitude or how you address them or say something, because it's different. And so we did, and I did, but it's a wonderful experience. And but I came home and met my wife, and
you did go to college, right?
yeah, I went to the University of Michigan, but I had a hard time. I couldn't adapt to it. So whatever had happened, and I was argumentative, and I guess and when I went in, I wanted to get into medical school, but I was 25 at that time, going to the Navy at 17, but it was all medical department, and I figured I could step in like in dentistry and do it right. But they said, you have to have pre-med. I said, can I take a pass-fail? They said, no, that's not, we don't allow that. And I said, well, some do. They said, what's the reading for pre-med, 4 years? And they said, well, there's English and literature, and broaden your education, make you a broader person. I said, you don't know my background. And I think that I don't know how much broader I could be. Academically, it might be a few lessons, but I think I could pass them. But I just couldn't understand the situation, and I took a biz ed course there at the university, but I'd forgotten how to study. I think I was mad. I mean, there was turmoil. I don't understand it, but
Well, but you eventually got diagnosed with PTSD in some form, right? Or you're with a PTSD group, or?
Yeah, the hardest thing, let me explain, this is something, it's interesting. When I got out, I knew I had problems. I tried to get in the VA hospital, I couldn't get in. After all of everything, but we talk about problems with the VA now, and I don't think they're as bad as what they were when the war was over, because the medical officers, the doctors that I found out, and in the surgical supply, I was calling on doctors, and I knew them, and I knew them all over the state, and I met some wonderful, wonderful people, and hospital administrators, and I knew the personnel, but it was, I forgot now where I was going.
Well, I was.
I mean,
I was asking about sort of PTSD, or how you eventually got diagnosed with that, or at least got connected with a group, and you were backing up.
Oh yeah.
We
got on the sidetrack of the doctors I knew.
Yeah.
Now getting back to the VA, what I found there, it wasn't administrators that were running the hospital, it was the doctors that were running you had to come up with, it was like they were protecting their status. They were almost all double or triple dipping. I'm not trying to say the wrong thing, but there were wonderful doctors everywhere, but it was so difficult to get in, but it's like a protection of the environment at that time. I mean, the environment, the medical environment. But it was, you'd go in and try to see someone and said, what do you want? What are you after? You know, it was a negative question. It's not, how can I help you, or what can I do? It was, what do you want? What are you trying to get? But that was, maybe I just sensed it, or I sensed it wrong, but it's different, and but in those days they were almost all white-haired and older fellas, and we didn't see any young doctors in the VA in those days, and it was so hard to get into it. But once I managed to get in, why then it was better, but most of the doctors I've talked to over the years, ones that seem to be in the know, the only solution is to have the veterans go into public hospital. In my case, I'm 90, I'll be soon 95, and I can't drive at night, and I can't get to Battle Creek unless someone drives me, and I can't go on a bus because you have to go up early in the morning, and for me to be there it's difficult, and so the answer, I know some of my physician friends for years have said that the answer to the VA is I don't know if it is the answer, but they said to have the veterans go to public hospital and save a lot of money. And but the VA has been, it's logistics are difficult for me, and I think it's overlooked, and travel pay is not the answer, because it's the problem. And it's nice for a younger person, he can drive his car, but I can't drive at night, and I can't get there, and so all my doctoring is locally now. I have Blue Cross Blue insurance for my wife, being a teacher, so I have wonderful insurance. So if I had to, I could go to VA, but it'll be resolved. It's going to take some time, I believe. But there's so many things that happen. But as I said before, the hardest part has not been the war. It's been post-war.
And you've been living with that for 70 years now.
Yeah, and I'm live by myself, and I want to live by myself. I'm blessed, and my son is across the street, and a daughter-in-law, and they take care of him. I'm that's a wonderful situation, but it's a lot to ask of them, and but like she came over yesterday and with her lighter, and she changed the lights in the ceiling or in the kitchen, and I can't walk on my grass because it's uneven, and my stability is not that good. But I'm blessed. I'm just so blessed, and so many friends, and my VA friends. I mean, God, I just love them.
Yeah, and you do have a pretty good memory on top of it all. Blessing or curse, you certainly have one, and that's been.
I don't feel like I do, but
for a man pushing 95, you certainly do.
Well, I'd say a lot of the stories I'm not telling, but I don't dare tell. I mean, there's nothing.
Yeah.
I don't, but the thing, I don't know how to discuss this. Betty Bennett here. I think the world of, lest we forget, I think the world of him, and Don Ellsborough. He's a workaholic. He's going to kill himself overworking, but it's so hard for me to. I really feel bad because they had the World War II event. It was, I don't know what it was, 8 or 10 or 12 weeks, and I attended every one of them. And I had something I think I could contribute, and I think I was credible. But I never got a chance to talk. And I have difficulty talking to a group of people. I probably couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But the story I wanted to get out, and it's real, and it did happen. And but the local group is great. But I know some of the stories are a little far-fetched. I mean, it might appear to be that way, but history is
full of things that are awfully far-fetched, and that's just how it kind of works. But we're kind of closing out the better part of 4 hours here, and I think I'm going to close out this interview session here. Just thank you very much for taking the time to share the story with me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Silver. Dr. Smither.
Smither, singular.
Without the S.
Very good.